Let me give you a little bit of context, so you know why we're here, and this is So I was inspired by this year's Mongol warrior statue at Burning Man. To me, it was the artist told me why he brought it to Burning Man. He said that Burning Man has everything: culture, music, food, people, except the warrior spirit. So hence why he brought that as a symbol of warrior spirit to the playa. And throughout the process, I was so inspired watching people paying respect to it. I said to myself, I've been looking for conversations about warrior spirit, so hence the start of Noble Warrior.
Nice.
And the idea here is to have men talking about what it means to be men in modern times, and typically around how we ground ourselves, doing self-mastery, and operationalize that in our life, family life, relationships, business life, etc., etc. The idea here is totally informal, so I'm not fishing for a packaged answer, sound bites, or anything like that. And also, it's not Barbara Walters trying to get you on something on tape and anything like that. If anything, ultimately, after everything's edited, actually I can hear. So my intention, I want to set in our intention. My intention is to get to know you a little bit better, understand this whole world of astrology and the mysticism that I don't understand. I'm curious though, but I don't understand it. Sure. So I'd love to know how your mind works and just get to know you as a brother, as a beautiful human being. That's my intention.
Beautiful.
What's your intention?
My intention is just to be present and to be honest and vulnerable and truthful about whatever comes to the surface based on whatever questions you ask, as well to be in this conversation about what it is to be a noble warrior, what it is to be in conscious dialogue around men and masculinity on this planet at this time, and hopefully offer insight and glean insight as well from wherever our conversation goes in a good way.
Beautiful. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's not like we have the answers, but we're inquiring together what it is. So thank you.
Absolutely, thank you.
So with that said, so I'll share with you this particular word medicine first. So this is tobacco from Mongolia. The way they use this is they use it during formal events like New Year's, Chinese New Year's, etc. So and then they only they exchange it like a handshake almost. So they will exchange the snuff bottle to each other, and then they will then put some in their hands. So I'll demonstrate, and then they typically don't use an applicator, but I use an applicator just because it's easier.
Okay,
it's a little cleaner that way.
Sure.
And then you don't need a lot, and then you can make a line or things like that. And then I use an applicator easily, and then it's very, very minty.
Okay.
Right.
Just use this
for
me.
Yeah, great.
Cool.
I'm glad you brought your own applicator. Fantastic. That's great.
Come to the rodeo prepared.
Yeah,
right?
no, it's great. I love it.
And just in one nostril?
Or two.
Okay.
Whatever you like. And typically you will also have this post-nasal drip.
Okay.
It's kind of like all tobacco snuff is kind of irritating. You can use that thing to dig it out.
Cool. Yeah, and I tend to get very, like with hape, for example, I get very, the fluid's open. I'm very coffee and spitty and...
perfect. And we'll cut all of that stuff out. Yeah.
Very nice, thank you.
How was that experience? Scale 1 to 10, how did it feel?
I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10, there's a 10 in the sense that it's very pleasant, very presencing, and I like the mint. I think that's something I've never experienced with the tobacco snuff before, so I find that to be very stimulating
Yeah.
Yeah, in a good way. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm happy to share this. My wife is Mongolian, and that bottle was actually a gift from my father-in-law.
Ah,
Yeah.
beautiful.
So it's his currency of love, so which I gladly receive.
Yeah. Amen.
I'm really excited to do this with you. So today we have Ryan, who is a new friend. One of our podcast guests, Paul Green, actually introduced us. And why don't we actually start from the place of, tell us a little bit about what is it that you do, so people can find some relatedness to know like who they're listening from.
Sure. So vocationally, I'm a body worker. I've been studying and practicing massage and an assortment of different healing modalities for the last 15, almost 16 years now. And I'm also an astrologer. I've been practicing astrology now since 2006 and studying it for a good 7 years before that. And I, as well, am a screenwriter and an author of a graphic novel that just came out. It's called The Medicine Gate. Thank you. That's been a journey as well. And a lot has been learned in order to create that as well. It has required me to learn a great deal more now that it's completed and more versions are coming through. So I guess I have my hands in a few different creative cookie jars, so to speak.
So why don't we start from the origin story a little bit, because there's so many directions I wanted to ask you, and promise me that you will remind me to talk about your graphic novel, because I'm very intrigued about kind of like from body worker to the creative outlet that way.
Sure.
But let's start off with the origin story first. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the pivotal moments that you had in your childhood that resulted in your interest in that kind of made you the man that you are, the person that you are, and then the body worker that you are?
Sure. I was born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I would say that as childhood experiences go, I was blessed. I had parents who loved me, and while there's no shortage of dysfunction in any family, I had an incredible father who was my coach, my Cub Scout master, he coached soccer, baseball, football, and was an all-around very strong presence in my life. And so too was my mother, someone who chose to stay at home until we were in school and be an at-home mother. And I had the good fortune of having a strong nuclear family. I have an older sister as well, and I feel blessed to have had an early exposure to women in a way that I learned very early I would never fully understand, but could absolutely respect that they have their own experience, and that there's an appreciation for what women experience different than men relative to hormones. And I would later learn about biology and discover, the emotional reality of men and women is unique to the gender, without any of it being good or bad or right or wrong. And I got to experience love for, in this case, my sister, of course, as well, my mother. But having an older sister was a big one for me, to learn about women in a way that I recognized in friends who didn't have that basic family structure. I saw the value or the benefit of having an older sister to respect women from a young age. I can't say that I didn't have my own, growing pains or learning curves there, but another big piece was having a dog. I had a dog, and to tie it into the healing practices that I would later gravitate towards, we acquired a dog when I was 7 years old, and it was this beautiful animal who was part Dachshund, so it had a longer spine and would often she would throw her back out. And I have such strong memories of learning how to love from this animal who was just this bundle of unconditional love, but would consistently have a physical imbalance where she would be laid out for days and have a heating pad, and I would work with her spine for hours on end and just find a sensitivity, and could see her leaning into certain applications of touch or kind of contracting away. And I was learning my own kind of relationship to the subtler energies then, without knowing it, of course, until later. I would learn about Chinese medicine and an assortment of modalities that would give me a system to understand what I was doing as a young child in relationship to an animal or a living thing and its energy patterns and its ability to kind of be sensitive to touch. That was a huge pivotal moment, actually. It was this particular animal that
Wow.
would lead me to suddenly have I guess a harnessing of an awareness and therefore applying it to not just humans but even dogs or animals, cats in particular. Like, animals know touch and are very sensitive, and therefore I could kind of learn sensitivity in relationship to animals that way initially, and then it would become human bodies later.
Wow, that's really beautiful. So you always had this kindness towards other beings?
I'd like to think so. I don't think I always had it in its entirety. I mean, I think we're all altruistic in nature, but of course we have a series of events in our lives that will create personality and ego structures that will later inform our ability or our comfort level with being that open and kind. I would say I haven't always been kind. I'm sure I've done many unkind things, and people may hear this and go, "Yeah, I remember when you were 12 and you said that thing."
Yeah.
But I've learned through heartache and tragedy as well, from just beautiful, heart-opening moments as well.
Yeah.
The value in loving kindness and compassion. I would say Buddhism is a philosophy / spiritual path that I've long gravitated towards and studied and practiced in those ways. And that's certainly a fundamental tenet of Buddhism, is the loving kindness and compassion.
So when did you, let's actually extract that just a little bit. So from that 7-year-old self, hey, I'm helping my dog feeling better, to I'm going to dedicate my life to body work. Like, was there a moment when you decided, like, okay, this is what I wanted to do, to tangibly heal another human being?
I'd love to say that it was as clear as that this was me dropping into a space of being in service fully as a healer. And I think for me, the awareness that it was something that I was drawn to do was when I was in college, and I was an undeclared major at University of Nebraska as a sophomore. And I remember, very actively loving to touch people, women I dated in particular, or just men or women, it didn't really matter as much as just I loved feeling the energy and feeling the relaxation that would result from an application of touch in a loving way. And I was going to drop out of college actually in my sophomore year and go to massage therapy school. And as a kid growing up in Nebraska, I wasn't exposed to much, if any, esoteric studies or practices. This is before the internet. And so I was quickly told that would not happen from my mother, who was paying for my education, and therefore I would get my degree.
She was not pleased.
Not pleased. And to her own, to that end, or to her credit, it's just not a world that she knows or has any comfort with, so it didn't necessarily exist as a viable means of supporting oneself and operatively succeeding in the world. So it wasn't until 10 years after that initial desire at 19 years old that at 29 years old, in the heart of my Saturn return, which we can talk about the astrology of that it became virtually impossible for me not to do it. And a lot of events kind of came together in very serendipitous ways for me to find my teacher and to go down that path in a very deliberate and very powerful way. And to that end, my teacher's name is Fred Midtower, and he has a profound approach to the body, and certainly took me through a number of healing protocols within my own treatment as well, my education as well, my apprenticeship, as well as applying those teachings. And so
well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's unpack that, right? So 29, from 19 to 29, 10 years. Something major happened. You met this teacher. Let's talk about that. Like, why was it so definitive that helped you clarify, all right, this is the path I'm on, heal myself, Da, 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 da. So let's talk about that.
You know, let's see if I can track this in a cool way or a clear way. But I moved to LA at 25 years old, and I was an actor and worked on a show for 3 years and had an incredible experience of, I guess, succeeding, at least financially, as an actor, and in doing so solely. And then when this gig came to an unexpected halt almost, there was a woman that I was in relationship with at the time, a beautiful yoga teacher who really introduced me to a lot of what would later has become my practice, my life practice, as far as my personal practices, and I'm sure we'll get to those. But meeting Fred Midtower through her, and realizing that my acting career was, in a sense, not quite getting the traction that I was intending. And
Fred was a acting teacher?
No, Fred is my bodywork teacher.
Okay, gotcha.
So I met him while I was with her. They were family friends, and basically it's like when you meet your teacher, you know, I guess when the student is ready, right?
And the teacher shows up.
Right.
And that was Fred.
And that was Fred. And so we went to an event in Northern California where I met Fred, and as my acting gig is coming to a close, my girlfriend was encouraging me strongly not to go back to waiting tables, but to get certified in massage. She says, "You have gifted hands, Ryan. This is your next step." And I listened to her, thankfully.
Oh, so she recognized.
Yeah, she was. I mean, that was part of it. Was just someone telling me my kind of instinctual leaning was actually a valid gift that was worthy of educating and pursuing. And so I did so, much to my benefit. And this was also in the heart of my Saturn return, which this is just when I was starting to really study astrology with greater vigor. And you know, from the first day of training, it was just, there were so many events in my life that led to the moment of I'd written a screenplay that my writing partners, while it was getting fast-tracked into production, my writing partners sued me, killed the project.
Oh, no.
The gig on the show comes to an abrupt halt, and the relationship where we both really believed we're going to get married and do that dance, it came to an abrupt halt. All of this in my Saturn return. I'm losing my mind, wondering what the heck did I do wrong? And then I read this beautiful book called Astrology for Yourself, which is more of a workbook, as an encouragement from another friend. And upon reading that, I realized for the first time that all these subjective, seemingly tragic events were symbolic or systemically happening as a part of a much larger puzzle, which is astrology. And I could see definitively upon studying astrology just how appropriate all these things falling apart really were relative to a more conditioned or enculturated way of perceiving myself and my personality and my ego and my reality from a more objective lens, and going, wow, I'm not this way because I'm crazy or because I'm messing up. It's actually, I'm dissolving a lot of structures in order for truth to emerge in ways that I wasn't in any way aware that I wasn't living it. And so, and bodywork was part and parcel to that discovery, and then doing the certification training with Fred and doing every one of his transformational bodywork courses that he offered. And I got to really start unpacking just who I am and all the false ways I perceive myself, as well, all the conscious identifications I could form and choose, like being a body worker and helping people and being in service and being compensated and having a certain harmony of giving and receiving.
Oh, so Fred's class is not just the mechanics of bodyworking. It sounds like there's some like inner game teaching as well.
Oh, yeah. He's a Jedi. He's a Jedi. And so it, you know, the body is merely an instrument of expression that energy will naturally find either excess or deficiency relative to emotional content that might otherwise need expression, can lead to stagnation. And so the body is, of course, a template for all the material that is ours to ultimately integrate or transform in our lifetime. And so the body is a great inroad, but it's not the full story. It's just merely the kind of the landscape where it's expressing. And if I've got a sore throat that's chronic, chances are my voice is in some way not fully self-expressed. And that could come from the fact that my 7th grade teacher shut me down in the middle of saying something, that I formed a belief that what I had to say wasn't valid, which is part of my story. It wasn't 7th grade, it was actually in 3rd grade. But that basic piecing together or connecting of the dots, where this chronic imbalance in the body stems from a much earlier and otherwise unknown moment, that through the tracking that Fred does, and through that process to get to that point, and to then to be with that 3, or that in this case, I guess I was probably about 8 years old, 9 years old, and to be with that young boy and to realize, wow, that led to a squelching of a voice, that led to a chronic imbalance within the throat, right? So that's a very, I guess, easy example, but there are many one can draw from how the body's ultimately expressing and what's going on, and tracking it that way through a number of systems, including Chinese medicine and Ayurveda, and allowing the...
So that class was the gateway to all these other
and as
deeper and deeper studies of the body and
definitely
the whole system.
I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I took that certification course. This was a means to an end of, I like doing this, apparently I'm good at it, I'm getting that kind of feedback. And then suddenly I realized there was a lot I didn't know, and there was a lot of trauma in my body that I had never looked at or explored. And through the process of what I would call kind of taming my dragons, and with Fred as a ready and skilled practitioner to lead that charge, or that inquiry, to really unpack the larger macro puzzle. And he'll go into past life, ancestral coding, to really realize, like, wow, I've been doing this my whole life, and lo and behold, my mother's father, that was his basic genetic disposition, and that energy, or that miasm, carried forth and was stored in my body. And until a skilled practitioner could access it, I could find the emotional release that I didn't even know I needed to have in order to not be perpetuating that same story. So.
Where were we? So you share about Fred's class, and that's the gateway to a lot of different new paradigms.
For sure.
Right? Chinese medicine, but it also sounds like you had some openings with like astrology as well. So let's actually go down that rabbit hole a little bit. Actually, no, let's not. So let's actually focus on just the body a little bit, because how would you say what you learned from this transformational body school complements to the work of, say, a psychology or psychiatry type of therapy?
In terms of complementary...
or not?
I think it certainly is complementary. I would definitely concur with that approach and that perspective. The two go very hand in hand. I have clients referred to me from therapists who don't have the legal right or freedom to touch their clients, but yet know their clients are holding a lot in their bodies. And so it's a nice compliment to say, all right, you're working out the fact that you weren't breastfed, and X, Y, and Z is the physical manifestation of that incomplete moment, or that traumatic element of one's childhood, we'll say. Then what I can do that, say, a psychologist couldn't do, is then apply touch to the areas of the body that are like, I've got a really tight jaw, I can't speak my voice, I don't trust my instincts. Things like that could come from an organism's natural instinct to, say, breastfeed, in this example, not being satisfied, is suddenly there's an instinctual imbalance that gets created. And it's really a muladhara. It's a root muladhara being the root chakra. It's a muladhara issue relative to how it can then express in, say, the Vishuddha throat. There's something, a yearning, a leaning that never got satisfied, and so it forms a pattern or a hold that can then manifest like TMJ. And so doing jaw release work is very valid relative to, say, that particular occurrence or non-occurrence in a child or an infant's life. That's, again, one among, I think, probably many, depending on the individual and depending on the actual trauma that's up for, transformation, up for integration, and forming a new pattern.
Because in my mind, this is a lot more direct. You can get the feedback right away, as in you see the muscle release.
Yeah.
Versus, let's say, if you go to a psychologist, not to invalidate the work of a psychologist, you can't externalize, validate. Oh, this knot in my head is now being released.
Yeah, I think talk therapy has its place and its value, as you just acknowledged as well. And I think that one can, through an intellectual comprehension, experience a level of physical relaxation or tension release on the level of, if I get something, but the need to integrate it is substantial in my perspective. And so if I go to my therapist and I have a breakthrough or an aha moment, the need to journal that as a piece, as well take it to my yoga mat, as well meditate on it, I feel to be essential. And so I feel like yoga is more the body, as well the mind, but also meditation being the mind, and psychology is also, I believe, a very emotional and intellectual piece, but to then tie it to the instinctual center, or the body, or the physical moving center, is a pivotal key that, absent that, and I think yoga or qigong or any physical meditative movement can achieve this end, but body work is another way to. I love when my clients bring their material to the table. It's not just a relaxing massage, but there's something going on. Let's go deeper into the story, deeper into the awareness that's coming online in relationship to the completion of that story, and then forming a new story instead of his story, so to speak, history. And so I believe each piece of the transformational puzzle is valid. I find I've referred clients out to therapists as well, based on what they're presenting, and realizing they need to unpack this more than just in a 2-hour session with me. And so it's all relative to the individual.
Right.
And what I glean from yoga, someone else could completely throw their bodies off in yoga. So I find that, it depends on the individual. Before I would never say blanket statement, everybody needs to do A or B. It's very unique to the individual.
Yeah. When I was younger, so I'm trained as an engineer. So when I was younger, I separated everything. The mind is the mind. The body is the body. Nutrition is nutrition, right? Emotion is emotion. I actually didn't even touch emotion. Like, I didn't have emotions.
Got it.
Because I'm trained as a scientist, right?
Right.
Quote unquote stoic. But then more and more I realized, like, holy shit, everything is actually all integrated. And this idea of psychosomatic stress, right? How everything you said, something that happens in the mind, the body manifests.
Yes.
And that's actually how disease happen, right? If you persisted long enough.
Right.
And then you can work inside out, outside in, just, all different kind of approaches.
For sure.
And I love the fact that your work combines not only the body work, but also retell a new narrative, new story. Because if you want to change your life, change your story. Right. If you want to change the quality of life, change the quality of questions that you ask, change your stories, and all of a sudden, new realms of possibilities will open up.
For sure.
So beautiful. Let's actually talk about astrology a little bit, because I'm fascinated, right? From someone who I was a skeptic. I would say I have a healthy skepticism around astrology overall. But I now come to appreciate this is a story, a good framework that people have been using for thousands, I don't know how long, thousands and thousands of years. And now it's almost like a scientific, right, explanation of, how we are in the astrological system, etc. So educate me on this, and for the people who are listening who may not be familiar with this, like, what is astrology? Is it the Sunday newspaper we read? Oh yeah, this week you're gonna meet the love of your life, kind of like deterministic point of view, or is it probabilistic? Can you just share a little bit about the framework of astrology?
Sure, I like that term, probabilistic. The saying "as above, so below" is directly drawn from an awareness of the planetary bodies, natural, they call it the music of the spheres. These spherical planets within our solar system orbiting around the sun, each of them creating a very specific and calculable vibration, and then having angular relationships to other planets that are very geometrically based. So to bring the science in for the engineer in the room here, the basic discourse of astrology is simply interpreting the planetary angles to one another, and the sun and the moon are of course included in that larger solar system structure of the 8/9 planets, and the I won't get into what Pluto is as a dwarf planet and all of that. That was a fun little drop in about 10 years ago where they demoted Pluto down to a dwarf planet, and as a Scorpio that was very insulting to it's my ruling planet, or one of my ruling planets, Mars being the other co-ruler of Scorpio. But the basic story is each of these planetary bodies are coming into different angular relationships to other planets, and those angular relationships we can discern from geometry have a coherency to them that is very harmonic, or very dissonant, or very frictional, or very disorienting. And so, for example, if I'm looking at a natal chart and someone's sun is in a sign that is square to where their moon is in, let's say, a sun in Scorpio and a moon in Leo, those are signs that are, quote, square, meaning they form a 90-degree angle to one another.
Okay.
That's very frictional. So if I look at someone's chart with an aspect like a sun squaring the moon, I can discern that on a level of their internal experience, they are working with a little more friction based on the fact that where these planets were the moment they were born informed their entire organism by virtue of a kind of an energetic blueprint, we'll call it. There's a great quote, I forget the book that it's from, but it says, at the moment you are born, a celestial chord is struck that is unlike any other in the universe, and it is yours to ultimately live and play out, and absent your presence, it never gets to happen. That kind of like to appreciate that we are so unique that way.
I love that. So that's more like an analogy with musical notes. Yeah, so I love that. Yeah, there's a lot of, to use the structure of music, which I'm not a musician, and I've studied the structure more from a psychological perspective, and that's Gurdjieffian fourth way studies, and we can come back to that. But the appreciation for vibration, for the formless coming into form, and the unique moment of taking one's first breath, and where the planets are, and what vibration they're corresponding into being the moment you take your first breath, with Sun in Sagittarius or Sun in Scorpio or wherever it might be, that informs what inspires us, what drives us relative to the sun, feeding and fueling us with life, teeming life on this planet. Without the sun, we don't exist. So the sun represents symbolically or archetypally that inspired aspect of ourselves. And so the sun's relationship to the moon, as I referenced a bit ago, or to Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, all of them are in unique positions, forming unique angular relationships with other planets, which the planets themselves represent archetypes of the human psyche. If I'm going to get up out of bed and do something, like let's say I've got a big day ahead and my to-do list is pretty steep and I've got to just go after it and there's no room for laziness. That's Mars. Mars is it takes that inspiration of the sun and it puts it into action. So the sun is the personal male energy, just as the moon is the personal female. So with using yin and yang, or light, dark, masculine, feminine, however you want to draw the polarities that we have in our dualistic structure of reality, the sun and the moon are the two most influential planetary bodies relative to this conversation that inform what inspires us, what drives us, how we feel, the habits we form. If something feels good, we want to do it more. If it doesn't, we avoid it. The moon kind of informs that. And so the sign the moon is in, the house that the moon is in relative to the 12 houses of the zodiac, as well its relationship to the sun and every other planet, is relevant to why we're impelled to do something. So it's more like, back to the probabilistic statement, we're impelled by the planets, we're not compelled. So What's the difference?
What's the difference?
Impel versus compel.
Well, if I'm compelled to do something, let's say if I'm compelled to eat pancakes in the morning.
Sure.
I have an experience of, I like pancakes. It's one of my favorite things in the world, so I'm going to eat that because I like it. I'm compelled to do it because I have an already existing awareness of it. I'm impelled to do something that may not have any reason or rhyme to it, but it's what's driving. It's like, wow, I didn't even realize I needed to write that email or post that blog, but something just inspired me.
I see.
That's how I would draw a distinction from the terms
I
on the
see.
spot.
I see.
I imagine if I looked them up in the dictionary, I might have a different answer, but that's my off-the-cuff answer.
Yeah.
But in terms of astrology and the probabilistic quality of how the planets influence our individual behavior as well as our collective behavior, it's glaringly obvious to me or anyone, I think, who studies this material and recognizes the valid influence that the planets have on my individual drive and desires and yearnings, and also challenges and imbalances as well, the collective. You know, I would say that our planet, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see how imbalanced our world is geopolitically, ecologically, economically. And to use astrology as a larger kind of macro lens to appreciate that this is part and parcel to a much larger transformational / evolutionary process that we happen to be in at this moment in this continuum of time as a species. And this is in large part Saturn in Capricorn approaching Pluto in Capricorn. It's a really big deal what we're all moving towards. And I think that where astrology for me has been such a beautiful study is it's not just a kind of left brain empirical perception of reality, but there's a lot of abstract, more transpersonal elements that influence.
What's transpersonal?
So if we have personal sun and moon, I feel something, you may not know that I'm feeling it, but it's happening internally. There's interpersonal, meaning you and I are talking, we're having a conversation, so here I am a Scorpio talking to a Sagittarius, and we have our own unique discourse. Then there's transpersonal, things that I have a relationship to God or spirit or source or whatever we want to call it that's unique, and you might have the same, and it might very well inform a lot of what you feel inspired to say or impelled to say that might differ from my perspective on more etherical or celestial dynamics of our existence, where if I was talking to, say, an atheist, it would be a very different conversation than to someone who is a devout Christian relative to, and by both, by the way, might have their own resistance to astrology relative to it not necessarily fitting in, not being congruent with the model that they prescribe to. But ultimately, it's not incongruent with any model if one's really honest with oneself. It's another way of perceiving a larger macro story of what's influencing human behavior, basically.
That actually is the precise point. Mutual friend Megan actually explained this to me, and that to me makes a lot of sense, because ultimately, if the story that people tell themselves empowers them, whether it be Christianity or astrology or science, or a mixture of all of them, let's say, right? Chances are it's going to be a mixture of all of them, right? Because we're all influenced by different stories.
Sure.
But if it empowers them to live the best life that they want to live, hell yes.
More power to you.
More power, yeah.
Absolutely.
So so thanks for sharing that. Really, really appreciate it. I guess for the people who are thinking about, I think my biggest contention with the idea of astrology was because, I believe I'm a sovereign person, right? It's all like this will.
Right,
free will. Willpower.
Yeah.
No one tells me what's what. But over the years, I learned that, well, what is the come from of this willpower really? Am I actually exerting this willpower? Do I really want to eat that thing because I really wanted to eat it? Or my body decided I wanted to eat it, and then I rationalized this decision later on, my cerebral cortex, right?
Sure.
So there's all that conversation about, well, fatalism, right? It's fate, it's destiny, versus it's my will. How do you, I guess, view the this study of astrology as a way to navigate this? Is it all fatalistic? Is it all deterministic?
It's a great question. You actually bring up two quotes that I want to include in my response.
Sure.
So with respect to fatalistic, there's a great quote from Carl Jung who says, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate."
Mm-hmm.
And that had a very big influence for me. And I've cut my teeth on Carl Jung's work for a while now, and depth psychology, and had a Jungian psychologist for a pretty good amount of time to unpack my own stuff. But back to this story about, is it fatalistic? Is it deterministic? I do believe we have free will. I believe that if I leave the house and I'm going to go to the gym, but I instead decide to go and get ice cream instead, I have that free will to do so. And nothing was going to, if I wasn't going to, let me rephrase that, the inclination to do one thing and then redirecting and doing something else, that's, I think, a perfect example of an expression of free will. Of, I said I was going to pick you up at 7, but I'm going to send you a text and tell you I'm not coming till 8, and that's me exercising my free will of I'll do this when I want to do this, or when it's right for me or whatever. And for me, what lives in the unconscious, which is represented by the moon in our astrology, and the unskillful expression of the sign that the moon is in, is of greater value than imposing my will on someone. So in other words, I want to know what in me is inspired to not pick you up at 7 when I said I would. What is it in me that's in resistance to either honoring my word or doing what I know is in my best interest as far as going to the gym instead of going to get ice cream? And, I would rather do the inquiry necessary to know I want to go to get ice cream because I want something that feels comfortable versus doing something I know will be of great value to me. And, there's my ego, and rather than abide by doing what it wants me to do, I will want what it does not want. If it does not want me to go to the gym, I'm going to the gym to override that. Now that's personal work, that's self-remembering in a sense, in a moment of, there's choice A that I was going to do, and then suddenly choice B presented itself, and this is far more attractive in the kind of short-term gain, but the long-term defect or imbalance, the kind of cost-benefit analysis of choices that we make. And so I do believe that free will exists, and it's something that we can employ. I think that free will combined with universal will is the real aim in the whole situation, where is it of better value to the world in a more altruistic sense of the word for me to go get ice cream or for me to go to the gym, or yoga or exercise or something that I think inherently has more value to me being the highest me that I can be relative to satisfying a craving or more directly an egoic distraction from what I recognize.
Right.
So the example may not be as clear as I would prefer, but the basic gist of deterministic, ultimately I'm going to find my way to the gym. And maybe I went and got ice cream that day, and I end up having a sugar crash and a nap instead of writing the 20 pages I otherwise would have written if I had followed the course. But I also believe that I'll learn from that experience. And rather than judge or beat myself up, I know when that craving's up again, rather than become addicted to satisfying my impulses or desires, being more disciplined, more deliberate about I know this is what benefits the larger macro puzzle of my dharma, what I incarnated to ultimately fulfill in this life. So I think that one common problem with a more non-dual approach, which is something that I personally ascribe to. Non-dual is relating to all things from one center, where there's light and dark, and neither one is good or bad, neither one is right or wrong. They both have to exist for life to exist. So for this three-dimensional reality, duality is the fundamental core. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. In a non-dual sense of the word, can I be so at one with the outcome of releasing my book and nobody buys it, nobody reads it, to releasing my book and becoming a New York Times bestseller? My work is to be in the center where either is perfectly relevant and valid and all the stories I might want to attach to either outcome are mine to be in right relation with. And back to another quote, this actually ties in really nicely to the other quote I was inspired to share, is Ramana Maharshi, Indian saint, regarded as one of the most enlightened beings of the 20th century and quite a brilliant being, and there's a lot of work, you can find him online. When he spoke, which was not very frequently, he observed silence a great deal in his life, but when he did, it was just this profound nuggets of wisdom. And in this quote, I'm going to use a word called prabdha karma. And prabdha karma in Sanskrit is like given karma. Given circumstances, you came out to play, whether you like it or not. You know, you came in with the father and the mother that you did, and whatever story unfolded and is still emerging and unfolding in this life is prabdha karma. It was your given karma. They were going to be your mother, whether you like it or not, right? And
some may say you've chosen them as your parents.
Right, right. You know, and we can get into different systems of perspective to orient that. And as far as this quote, to bring it through, so Ramana Maharshi said, the ordainer controls the fate of souls in accordance with their prabdha karma.
Wait, back up one more time. You lost me.
No worries. So the ordainer, or God, or what do you want to call it? So the ordainer controls the fate of souls in accordance with their prabdha karma, their given karma. Whatever is destined not to happen will not happen. Try as you may. Whatever is destined to happen will happen. Do what you may to prevent it. This is certain. The best course, therefore, is to remain silent. For me, that quote comes to mind in moments when I'm really grappling with, do I choice A or choice B? Do I say this or do I not? And because I have Gemini rising, in my astrology, that's a common reality that I face, is I can do A or I can do B. There's two, and I have to choose, and I want to choose consciously, and I want to trust my instincts so that when I do choose A, I'm not looking over my shoulder wondering what B could have been.
Right.
You know?
Because you're going to go this way.
Right, because then all of a sudden now I'm steering into the rocks. And so with that, I believe that to be a true statement in my experience. I just brought up a moment ago a Carl Jung quote about fate. It's the unconscious, directing our lives, so to speak. Or I should say, if I go get ice cream every day for a year, and suddenly I develop a...
Diabetes too.
Right. Easy 1, 2. I could just say that was my fate, and I can try and silver line it. But in truth, my unconscious consistently was directing my choices, and it had consequences that, if I really want to call it fate, I'm actually shortchanging the opportunity for real, genuine, self-realized growth, and go, wait a second, I actually created an environment for this to happen, and that was based on choices I made against my better judgment, or against a more conscious awareness that there is a healthy or less healthy way of doing something, or satisfying cravings, in that kind of tied-in example. So with astrology, relative to the Ramana Maharshi quote, the planets impel us, but they don't determine our fate. They don't immediately say, you're going to do this no matter what on Tuesday, November 2nd, where horoscope, back to your original question, I find value in all of it, so I'm not going to shortchange what horoscopes do. I will say that it, at best, is an incomplete picture, or a soundbite frequency that has some degree of relevance, where, for example, if I'm writing a horoscope, which I don't do, but if I were writing a horoscope for Sagittarius right now, the fact that the Sun and Jupiter and Mercury are exactly conjunct at 4 degrees of Sagittarius right now points to a very expansive, very wise space that Sagittarius are occupying right now. There's unique insights that are coming because Mercury is also retrograde, so we're seeing things from an entirely different lens right now if we pause and don't let our already existing kind of projection of what's happening or onto the... I have a story about my girlfriend is doing this, and I could project I'm not worthy as a result if I'm letting my own stories come into the conversation, and instead appreciating that the opportunity to see things from a new lens is very strong with the Sun, Jupiter, Mercury conjunction. I was speaking about Sagittarians in general, but that's influencing everybody. But if I'm writing a horoscope for Sagittarius, I'm going to say, you're seeing things in a new way. It's a great time to examine your beliefs, examine your ideas about reality and your story, and a wonderful time to recognize that you're part of the co-creative process. What is the vision you're living into? What is your conscious intention? And if you aren't clear on that, now is a great time to meditate on that, to sit with what this upcoming new moon in Sagittarius is about for you. Now is the time to review and take stock in A, B, and C feel like relevant and positive and advantageous perspectives, but X, Y, and Z are old stories, foolish ways of holding myself or judging myself in less than in less than positive or loving ways. And so as we're going into a waning moon cycle, for example, or we're in a waning moon cycle, the new moon's on the 6th of December of this month and this year, it's a great time for letting the kind of slower, heavier energy of, at least in the northern hemisphere, the winter months of winter, and the quality of the lunar cycle coming to an end to be, it's less about going out and building and doing and more about going in and exploring and ultimately getting clear and excavating all the old material that in our most conscious state we can recognize there's no cheese down that hole, there's no benefit in holding that story in place or that identification. So that was a lot of different information. I don't know if I answered the question.
Well, overall, to me, you answer the question multiple angles. But what I gather from all of this is use astrology as a way to raise your consciousness, awareness, right? To the unaware, right? To the deeper level of awareness. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. I mean, for me, astrology came online at a moment when my subjective reality was, for all intents and purposes, pretty horrific, pretty like everything was collapsing around me. And subjectively, that was a real story.
That was not fun.
Yeah, that actually happened. And I could track the details, and nobody's going to argue that was a hard time. Yeah. What astrology did for me upon reading the book Astrology for Yourself was I suddenly realized that there's a whole macro story going on, and objectively speaking, I was right where I needed to be and going through exactly what I needed to go through to really access my true nature as, a Scorpio in this case.
So I have a question there. So one of the things that I don't like personally is I want to go this direction, but now astrology or whatever, external stories, it can say, hey, don't go down this road because you might have hazards, accidents, go down this road instead. So now I'm doubting myself, right? I don't like that, right? So then, but also, in other words, informing me of new awareness, bringing me something that I wasn't aware of before. I'm all about that.
Right.
But if it now becomes a limitation, don't do this and don't do that, and then now the world that I live in becomes smaller and smaller.
Right.
And then now I'm adhering to this. Now I'm like very skittish of everything, and then that's the part I don't like personally. So how would you advise me on making sure that this is a informative mechanism rather than a
do this, don't do that.
Right, stoppage, right, barrier to living a free life. Because ultimately, for me, the highest value that I have is this inner sovereignty and external sovereignty, freedom. Sagittarius.
Yeah, Sagittarius,
right,
exactly.
Totally, all the way, the highest value.
Yes.
So when things that basically tells me you can't, then my natural reaction is, oh, you really?
Really?
F
show you. Yeah, exactly. Let me show you what I can and can't do.
Right. I'll go the opposite way, right?
Here's what I'll address one piece, which is
Sure.
I don't actually believe astrology says do or don't do anything ever. I feel like, for example, let's say you're presented with a contract you need to sign, but Mercury's retrograde, and everybody says don't sign contracts in Mercury retrograde. The advice I would give a client in a situation like that is, if you're able to wait until after Mercury retrograde, then wait. And if you're not able to, this isn't the end of the story. This isn't the end of the road. This doesn't mean that it's going to go bad, though we can easily infer and project onto this fear. And then, now I'm feeling skittish about signing a contract because I'm not supposed to. For me, it's, instead of reading the contract 3 times, read it 6 times. Instead of holding a position on something that you feel is absolutely necessary, consider it from every angle before you hold that perspective to be the truth. And so in other words, like I was making reference to Mercury being retrograde, currently, the value in seeing things from a different lens of perspective is very rich. And so to be in negotiations and conversation about things in a Mercury retrograde, I find to be very advantageous, because you're seeing it in a way you wouldn't see it with Mercury, which rules our cognition and our communication, how we receive information, cognize it, and then communicate and interpret. We have a unique perspective right now. And the disadvantage is, if I sign a contract, I may not have considered everything the way I would have if Mercury wasn't retrograde, and now that it's gone direct, I'm like, oh God, I signed on for 2 years, and really 1 year was the obvious choice. What was I thinking? And then we have to come back and possibly renegotiate. So for me, it's about, this is happening, and if you're going to sign that contract because there's a deadline,
Awareness.
so be it. Bring awareness.
6 times.
Yeah, exactly. Get 4 opinions instead of 2.
I see.
Really make sure that you've got attention brought to the details, because there are things that we can miss more readily during a Mercury retrograde. So it's just reframe. Or if you're going to travel and the sun is conflicting Jupiter, then I would say double check your itinerary, make sure your reservations are bound are confirmed, and things you might not normally do, but then you get to the airport and they don't have your reservation, and then you're hitting that, the astrologer said the sun was squaring Jupiter, therefore that meant bad things would happen. No, it just means that you've got to be extra attentive and extra aware.
I like that. Now that's operational, right?
Yeah,
Operationalizable versus do or don't do kind of a thing. So
Totally.
I appreciate that. Thank you
Sure.
for the reframe. A lot more questions, but I think it would be a good time to do a little hape. Are you up for that?
I'm down for hape.
Okay, great. So I got some interesting hapes recently. So this is hape from Hunikun tribe.
Okay,
It's very strong.
great.
This is one with mint. Also Hunikun, but one with mint. This is the gentler one, which I use every day. So do you have a preference? Gentle, strong?
Strong.
Strong?
I like strong.
Okay,
I have an appreciation for this medicine.
Great.
And
So I'll let
go
you
here.
do that.
Great, thank you.
How was that experience? Level 1 to 10?
9.
9.
It's great. Yeah, it was good.
What
It's
about
good.
it?
I usually, what I'll do more commonly is to avoid blowing my nose, or not avoid, but to be with the medicine more thoroughly, as I'll suck it back and spit it all, like just keep that going.
Oh, wow. You like the post-nasal drip.
Well, it's funny.
So irritating.
I was introduced to hape in an ayahuasca ceremony, and was thoroughly appreciative of its effect. And and it instigated a purge, which isn't common for me with that medicine. And in ceremony, receiving the sacrament was it was just, that's how I was taught, is like, do your best not to blow your nose and really bring it back and through. And what I found upon doing it subsequent times was my fingers and my toes, I just felt like my nerve endings completely open. My spine got very strong, and I was, with a long-term yoga practice, I was aware of my Sushumna and the chakras that are, inhabiting that central channel called the Sushumna, where the the Pingala channel is the masculine, the right side, and the Ida channel is the left side. And I was just feeling this incredible weave where it decalcifies the pineal gland, right? Is one
the
of
Kundalini awakening kind of a thing.
It really did set the Kundalini into a very strong, and it just initiated it for me in a very powerful way. And so whenever I do the hape, I'll do it with that basic mindset of I'm going to just bring this all the way through and let it cleanse my lungs of whatever might be there that my body wants to expunge but doesn't have that kind of that fulcrum to kick it out. And I find, like, for example, if I'm coming down with a cold or I feel like some pathogen has found its way in, hape is one of my go-tos as a medicine to just nip it in the bud and clear it quickly.
So fascinating. I'm going to try that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it, because my default is it's irritant ultimately, right? So I want to expel it as quickly as possible, but I learned to sit with it a little bit longer.
Yeah.
Especially seeing people who's more experienced with it. So I'm going to try your method and see how that goes.
Great.
Well, on that note, since you mentioned ayahuasca, how often do you practice it? And how do you, let's see, how do I ask this question? How do you use that experience to help you be more grounded, be more on your path, focusing on your dharma?
Great question.
Because you have a lot of tools, right? Astrology,
Yes.
The body, Chinese medicine. You're very into, like me, into a lot of different tools.
Yeah.
How do you use it as a way to guide your purpose?
Ayahuasca came to me in 2009, and at the time I was in a pretty challenging place on my journey, and for me, my first time sitting with the medicine was profoundly illuminating of the internal story that was manifesting an external challenge in my life. And from that moment forward, in terms of answering your question of how frequently do I do it, or what is its function in my overall story.
Right.
That first moment was such an extraordinary evening, and it was just a one-night thing, and many practitioners advise to do it two nights in a row.
Minimum, right.
And I find that to be advantageous guidance. I find that 2 nights for me has most effectively brought to the surface and integrated what, say, the first night brings up. The second night, in my experience, tends to bring a greater awareness to my stuff, what my issues are, whether it's physical, emotional, mental. As we talked about earlier, none of that is separate. And as a medicine, DMT or dimethyltryptamine brings on that entheogenic awareness, the entheos being like the God within. And so from more of a Gnostic perspective, that Christ consciousness, that ability to recognize oneself as creation, creator, created, and creation. And the awareness is consistent with many of the spiritual practices or traditions that I've studied or practiced in a way that, oh wow, I am that. Like, I am that I am, or Tattvamasi, that Sanskrit meaning that art thou, or I am that. And to realize, for me, to see myself as that, as well to see where I might shut off perceiving others as that, judging and being critical, or feeling like I know and they don't, or they know and I don't, and the gestalt that can form in the human psychology. The medicine was, and still is, a tremendous kind of like Control-Alt-Delete of all the
reset.
Yeah, all the mental chaos that I otherwise carry and have no real handle on. I can't say I control any of it, but I have a handle on it more so with the basic awareness that the medicine brings to the fore. And there's a great saying that you can achieve in one night of ayahuasca what would take you 10 years of talk
therapy, right?
And I'll appreciate that what I've accomplished in terms of really going in and really getting to the core imbalance, I've found few things that do so as effectively and as expeditiously as ayahuasca and other plant medicines for that matter. And in particular, the spirit of ayahuasca is perceived to be a very feminine spirit, very loving, very kind of, they call it the mother or the grandmother. And I, at the time, was really going through a challenging relationship dissolution process and had I had the betrayal card play out. A girlfriend cheated on me, and it was a thing. And I was, just, I can't trust women. I'm going celibate, and I, and never mind, and any of that. And then the medicine was like, this is you with you. Really get that. That this isn't her. She didn't do anything. You just had to go there, and you had to feel that, and to play that through as a way of integration, as opposed to, I can't trust women. And of course, it's a larger systemic imbalance from wherever, I had issues with my mother, and not external issues as much as just internal trust, like vulnerability. We're such delicate organisms. And so for me with ayahuasca, there was, and still is, such a healing process that she takes you through. And every human being is different. We can all, you and I could drink the same cup of medicine and have profoundly unique experiences based on what that adaptogenic medicine does. You might have this tapeworm that suddenly you're like purging out both ends, and it's this wild experience. Whereas I might sit there completely docile because that's just not what I'm in the midst of processing. That's a more physical example.
Also from the outside.
Right, exactly. Like, I may not be purging that way, but she's definitely going to take me on a ride. And, I found and continue to find that the medicine brings me to a place of self-remembering that I am the capital S self, and that the elements of my ego structure, my trauma body, or things that have informed identifications that I've held or long held are, I don't want to say they're unreal, but they're not what I've made them to be. And suddenly I have a new...
It's an egoic construct.
Yeah. I mean, they say that like 5-MeO-DMT, a slight derivation on the chemical constitution of dimethyltryptamine, informs this kind of dissolution of the ego, where I don't know if you've experienced 5-MeO-DMT. So it's actually where I was first introduced to plant medicine.
You went...
I started there. I started at like the pinnacle, and then found ayahuasca years later.
Wow.
And the appreciation for just how many things I thought were true or real, or systems of belief that I was prescribing to, were founded on events or moments in my life that when I look back at and found a deeper layer of healing around, because the medicine took me there, and all of a sudden now I'm in my 7-year-old having whatever experience I had then, and realizing how much that's informed where I close off, where love isn't as readily flowing through me. That's personally something that ayahuasca's brought on multiple occasions. And in terms of use, frequency, and that kind of thing, I've had years where I've done it probably 24 times, and then I've had years where I've not done it once. And I've come to a space with all plant medicine, quite frankly, as if it's calling me, it'll reveal itself. I'm not out there trying to search it or seek it out. And good example is, in the years where I'm not doing it, it's not even a subject of conversation or of thought, and I don't see it in my inbox. But suddenly when it starts coming up a lot, I know, she's inviting me to come back and to have another conversation. and deeper connection to my intentionality and my function, my purpose in this world. And I believe as a spirit, ayahuasca is a profound teacher. And when we were talking, when we met, you know, the appreciation I have for integration, ayahuasca provides a lot of profound insights, as do many plants, all the plants, and the need for follow-up practices, and whether it's meditation and yoga as it is for me, the absence of that is kind of like you're missing the overall picture, the opportunity. The healing that's there is not just a one-night thing. I'm going to leave ceremony and I'm healed and I'm done and I'm clean. And you do have that feeling often after a ceremony where all is one, and you feel that and you know that to be the truth. And then life starts happening, and without the practices to support that awareness, like for me, as I mentioned, meditation and yoga certainly are, a lot can be lost.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're going to do that kind of work, know that there's kind of like yoga, like taking it off the mat and living yoga in the world is the real takeaway, the real opportunity. But the practice is the on-ramp to that awareness. And so just as a ceremony is the on-ramp to that oneness, that entheos, that entheogenic experience and awareness, there are follow-up practices that I believe are essential to sustaining and really rooting that awareness in your everyday life.
100%. Yeah. Agreed. Yeah, very much the same way. The way I articulate it to people who are even curious about what it is this gives you a benchmark of what's possible. And what you or I or any one of us is capable of. Right? That I love the way you articulate entheogen. It's like ignite that light within us, bring that awareness front and center. And biochemistry speaking, it down regulates your fear center response. And you can relive quote unquote trauma and then look at it from other angles. Right. Then you can really come from a place of, oh, okay, so how can I learn from that quote unquote traumatic experience again? So question about, if you don't mind, let's actually go a little deeper in that practice. Some people, this is definitely not for everyone. Right? It's a very intense experience to look at your life from various angles. Not a lot of people want to do that. Right. And it also is a physically intense experience, right? It may bring up experience of fear, etc., etc. But one of the common fear that I hear people say is, well, I don't know what I'll do. I might let the monster out. I gotta control it. I don't know what I'll do. So I don't have an answer to that. I think everyone's different, but I'd love to inquire with you. What would you say to that? If someone said, I don't know what I'll do, or the inner monster will come out, or the shadows might come out, you know, I need to contain the monster with discipline. Right. So what would you say to that?
Wow, it's a great question. One thing I like about astrology in terms of speaking to someone individually is I can talk to a Sagittarius about, in answer to that question of, oh, I guess something I got to contain, I would say to a Sagittarius, well, this is an adventure into what lives in the unconscious. This is an opportunity to explore and expand into an aspect of yourself that's going to be there either way, and chances are it's probably limiting your freedom in life way more than you're aware. And from that lens, a Sag is like, limiting freedom, I don't want that, therefore I'm gonna have to look where I don't want to look, or where I feel is potentially more dangerous than beneficial to explore. But I'm using terms that a Sag would really resonate with.
I see.
And in general, you know, if we take, like, I think it was Napoleon Hill that said, what we resist persists. If you're afraid of something, chances are turning into it as opposed to away from it is the real solution you seek in the ultimate freedom in life that we all aspire to live and experience. And I never advocate medicine lightly.
It's a very powerful. It's a very powerful tool, experience.
It is, and I agree with you. It's not for everyone, and I think that it came to me at a time when I was readily prepared for what it was showing me, and consistently has shown me. I had a lot of context for it, and I think that there are other medicines that might help peel back layers with greater comfort, or not as I should say, it's a great kind of rung in the ladder to say, oh, have you experienced the psilocybin magical mushrooms? And if the answer is no, that might be a nice inroads to another entheogenic experience that, you know, the biochemistry of psilocybin and dimethyltryptamine are not dissimilar. They're cousins, basically. They're very similar. They're activating and releasing serotonin in a very specific way to have the insights that we're talking about. And not that I think mushrooms is any less intense or any less important to do mindfully. If someone has that strong fear of, I don't know what's going to come up, and they have an opportunity to, in a similar ceremonial container, go into those places in themselves, I might, if someone has a true terror of what ayahuasca might bring to them, or what it might expose and force them to look at or deal with, or how it might express itself, I might offer that as an alternative of, here's another entheogenic inroad and on-ramp to the awareness of, there's your demon, or a demon that is yours to come into right relation with. That'd be one way. Another way would be, if it's in you, you want to know it. And if you're afraid, really look at the origin of that sensation. And
you're not escaping it from yourself.
Yeah.
It's there.
Basically, you can't avoid what lives within, which is all things, and in my estimation. And therefore, if it's something someone feels called to, let's say they're like, oh my God, I read this article, and then this I listened to this podcast, and everybody's talking about it, and I can't avoid it, then chances are there's something there. There's a gravitational pull to going to a place that, while unfamiliar and therefore scary, what lives through the process of going through that fear is a level of love that, of course, we all aspire to. And I listened to your podcast with Paul Green, and From Fear to Love, and the beautiful way he articulated a lot of pieces of his puzzle brought me a greater appreciation for just how many different avenues we can go down to achieve that same end of experiencing, back to the kind of non-dual reference I made earlier of, I perceive non-duality to be unconditional love, where I don't think that anyone ought to be doing things any differently than they are, all the way up to our commander-in-chief, and recognizing the element of our human collective unconscious that is being mirrored in a very loud way right now. And therefore, rather than make you wrong and wanting to stand up in resistance to that, I'm going to see myself in that, recognize that if I weren't seeing that, I might actually behave in ways that I see to be relatively egregious in that behavior, to go, oh, now I'm seeing myself, I'm seeing my narcissism, I'm seeing my own misogyny or whatever else might inform my unconscious behavior in a way that it's a great object lesson and teacher, as opposed to this horrific thing that needs to be
corrected.
Yeah. So that's kind of like using the world and the collective as a macro puzzle for what lives in me, and I can see myself in that. And I think plant medicine in general, just when we go to a non-ordinary state, we're experiencing reality in a more expanded, more I can't think of the right word to say, more total, but more, we have more eyes on the story than we'd have otherwise. And not everyone is designed that way, to want to look and want to know. And it's not for me to say who should or shouldn't do anything. I just know what works for me. And so I would talk more also about my experience of, I was terrified. In fact, every single ceremony I step into, that trepidation lives in me, because you don't know what you don't know, and the unknown, by virtue of its absence of familiarity, is scary. It's we don't know what's going to happen, but it's kind of like fear and excitement. And by excitement, I mean to have an enthusiasm, again, in Theos coming in, enthusiasm for what's possible. Because we could go into the fear in the worst case scenario, and I'd say, play that through. What is the worst thing you think that could happen? And what is on the other side of that potential fear, where it could be, what's the best thing that could happen? And is that a cost-benefit analysis that pans out in saying yes?
What is the expected value?
Right. Wow.
How was that experience? Scale 1 to 10. 10 being the most painful, 1 being the most gentle.
I'd say it's about I've had some experience with Sananga, so I'm not in any way surprised, but it's definitely about a 6. I mean, it's an intense medicine. And
you want to take a moment still? It's okay. Take a moment.
No, I feel good. I can't quite open my eyes yet with any great comfort, but the appreciation I have for just the benefit in one's vision and the cleansing that it is for potential imbalances in one's vision and one's eyesight is, it's worth the price of admission, so to speak. Yeah. And but no, it's great, and I definitely always appreciate after it. It just feels like so much, say, relative pressure in the head just suddenly kind of gets softened. I found that with Hape as well. It was very expansive and felt like there was more room. Yeah. How about you?
I have a complex relationship with Sananga and Hape. It's never comfortable. Some people think that I'm kind of masochistic that way. Like, oh, you really like pain. Oh, no, on the contrary, I really don't like it.
Right.
But precisely the reason why I continue to lean into it. Because I get that glimpse of silence afterwards. You kind of like a hard workout.
Right.
I always compare it to a CrossFit workout. I was like, it's like a CrossFit workout.
Yeah.
You're spent. You're physically spent on the floor. But in that moment, my mind's clear.
Right.
So similarly, it's painful.
Right.
But immediately afterwards, I can speak with perfect intention. Versus thinking about, oh, should I say this? Shouldn't I say this?
Right.
It's a little uncomfortable. Right.
Put you more in your body, more more present.
Body,
right.
More present. So segue to, I want this podcast to not only just be inspired by people's narrative, but let's actually get tactical, right? So say people are inspired by who you are, what you say, your point of view in the world. Let's get a little tactical about how do you stay grounded on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, year-to-year. Share with us some of the disciplines that you have, the way you run your life physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, per se, professionally, all of it.
With my life becoming busier and busier as it has this year, and with the release of a book and a few different things that are happening, the obviousness of meditation's value and benefit for me, and I don't think anyone would argue with this, is it's the best 20 minutes to an hour I could spend in my day, if I'm truly honest with myself. I preferred to get up and meditate first thing in the morning, and having done Vipassana meditation twice, which is a 10-day silent meditation that was the practice of Gautama Buddha and what he developed and ultimately taught to his final days in his body, the benefit of going in and really being with the noise until it subsides, basically, which I found in both the Vipassanas that I did, the noise was profound and the discomfort was substantial, and the duration of time was essential. If I had only had 6 days or 7 days, it wouldn't have fulfilled on its aim, which is, really, really being present, essentially. And so meditation is the short answer, and that particular style of meditation is what I've prescribed to. I have a few different Buddhist sadhanas I've received through empowerments from various Rinpoches, and His Holiness the Dalai Lama I received an empowerment from as well. Those practices are also pivotal for me.
Actually, I don't want that. Well, I don't know what that is. What's
an
that?
empowerment.
Yeah, what's that?
So, in the case of Buddhist empowerments, you can receive an empowerment on a certain deity. And in Buddhism, like Hinduism, is a polytheistic orientation. There are many gods representing many aspects of experience, like the god of wisdom is Manjushri, or Chinrezi or Avalokiteshvara, it's synonymous names, is the god of compassion. So we are all of us compassionate, we are all of us wise relative to empowerment I felt drawn to receive to better enhance and substantiate my experience of that energy. In this case, Red Chinrezi is a empowerment I received from a man named Garchen Rinpoche. And the way that an empowerment works is once you've done this 2 or 3 day process of empowerment, you receive a practice, a sadhana that you commit to doing. Depending on the empowerment, it varies in terms of the commitment. And the way it essentially works is I will perceive Garchen Rinpoche as my guru relative to him as an embodiment of Red Chinrezi. And so suddenly he goes from guru to deity, and then I go from identification of that basic relationship into now I am Garchen Rinpoche, I am Red Chinrezi in this case.
So like a spiritual role model.
Yeah, kind of like it represents something very symbolic and very specific, each deity does. And then from that, recognizing myself as that and recognizing my orientation to every moment. Let's say someone's coming at me with a closed fist ready to do some damage. From an ego standpoint or from my sympathetic nervous system, I might be very, you're coming at me with yang, I'll meet you with yang, right? Which is not a martial art at all, but or in that way, not compassionate at all. And so remaining in that space of awareness relative to that situation, I don't have to make you wrong or fight you, but rather, what is the fastest way to, well, first of all, how can I remain in that center such that your yang becomes yin all on its own, and I don't actually have to be involved in your story, even though you're projecting me as this thing you need to attack.
I see.
And so that, of course, is a more specific physical endangerment, but even energetically, if someone's angry and they happen to cross paths with me in the street, or it's someone that I love and care for is having a moment and suddenly I'm the canvas upon which that's being projected, if I'm not mindful and I get into my ego and I get defensive, and suddenly now it's this 2-hour process of figuring just who's right, who's wrong, and that to me feels like a waste of time relative to, oh, you're having an experience, how do I remain objectively aware in the midst of our subjective exchange such that I don't lose myself in this moment of expression, this moment of emoting or energy and motion.
Lose your centeredness. Lose your sovereignty.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And so to remain sovereign in that awareness of that particular bandwidth or frequency, to maintain a connection with that so that we all have the same aim. We all want peace, we all want harmony. And if I'm not mindful and I don't do these practices regularly, I'm far more prone to buying into the story and becoming... To react. Yeah, so the original question, like my practices, Buddhist empowerments have been a part of my journey, and therefore the sadhanas that correspond with those are part of my practices. And I personally find being in my body to be essential. So I found yoga, and I found specific ways of exercising.
Any specific yoga, by the way?
I have a pretty varied array of teachers that I've worked quite diligently with over the years, and I found them to be like Shiva Ray is someone that I studied with. This is 15 years ago. Regularly, and then Saul David Ray is someone that I worked a lot with, and I find great value in his presence and his teachings. And currently, and I think Rod Stryker is someone bringing a lot of incredible yoga into the world as well. And I've done workshops here and there. I can't claim that I would call Rod Stryker my teacher, but I do appreciate his work in the world. And in general, I mean, a vinyasa practice, I'm a pretty I have a lot of energy, a lot of prana moves through my body. I tend to be moving a lot.
Prana
And
means chi.
prana, yeah, it's a Sanskrit word for energy, essentially. Chi being the Chinese, same, chi and prana are the same basic thing in conversation. And so I found for me, I'll do a yang practice probably more regularly than a yin, though I think both are essential relative to what is my current moment. If I wake up super exhausted from having worked, and is it the smartest thing for me to keep pushing? Probably not, but softening. If I'm carrying tension, there are varying ways to approach that, and knowing one's body and knowing one's kind of the energy of the moment, where my current practice, I study regularly with a man named Steve Jones, and I find his yoga to be exceptional. Currently, he plays no music, and it's just very alignment-based, breath-based yoga that, for me, is consistent with my natural state of peace. And so, while I don't in any way think music and yoga is a bad thing, I appreciate it. When I do my own practice, I'll often listen to specific music to kind of keep a rhythmic flow for myself. But I also find that doing one's own practice after one learns the body, and I've done yoga teacher trainings in order primarily just to know the ins and outs of what a good practice is.
Oh, I see.
Why we do what we do.
Interesting.
So I do like my own practice as well, but I find in this moment, at least, Steve Jones has been someone I regularly appreciate. And I think a good sign of, or I should say a sign of a good yoga class for me is lying on my mat and shavasana, and I don't fall asleep, but I don't really maintain a physical awareness of anything other than just that state of presence. That's, to me, the end-all goal of an asana practice, and I find I get that in his class quite regularly. And so, and if I take someone else's class and that's not happening, I don't tend to want to return, because it's not quite taking me where I could probably get to myself, or I know I can get to in his class, as an example.
So meditation, yoga, anything else?
Nutrition's key. What we put in our bodies is, I think, the strongest awareness we can bring to our day-to-day, as far as mindfulness in what we eat, even praying over our food, and presencing ourselves to the life force, the Shakti, which is another Sanskrit word, which is more about that spark of life force, where energy itself is prana, in terms of distinguishing those terms. If I'm eating something rich in nutrients and superfoods versus a more dense meal, it's pretty obvious to me, based on cultivating an awareness of my body, that it's like shooting myself in the foot if I eat, like, for example, I use pancakes as an example. I love pancakes, I really do. And I figured out a way to make superfood pancakes. And it has very little sugar, it has high nutrients, spirulina is one of the main superfoods in it, and spirulina and cacao go very well together in smoothies and, or in this case, pancakes. And as a taste profile, and there's an energizing and sustaining relationship, and then with a lot of ghee and coconut oil, there's also that fat that allows the body to burn it throughout the day. And so, for example, Burning Man, you brought up earlier, my go-to in the morning is a superfood pancake, and I'm getting all the proteins, antioxidants, and essential nutrients I need to sustain a very high level of energy without exhaustion, without depletion, with relatively a very tasty meal. And so there's a way to kind of find that balance of making sure you get the nutrients you need. Most people are nutrient deficient, don't necessarily have a lot of education in what the body needs, but then also knowing one's own personal constitution, whether you're using Ayurveda as a model, and if you have a strong vata, to eat grounding foods is very important, right? Whereas if you're a strong pitta, eating cooling foods to help bring balance and harmony. And so knowing aspects of yourself from these different systems of awareness of the body is huge. So nutrition, water, I think I would posit, and I have no basis for this estimation, but I would posit that about 75% of the planet's dehydrated. And when you're dehydrated, your brain's not functioning as highly as it can. And also other imbalances result, and then we crave things like sugar when really we need water. And so I would invite anyone who might otherwise have a sweet tooth or a yearning.
Speaking to one.
Then for me, as I understand it, and I'm not a nutritionist, I'm not even credentialed to speak about it in a way that would advise anyone, but my own personal learning has been the craving for sugar will more often than not be satisfied by drinking water, even though it might not taste good. But see, an acidic body wants further acidity. And so if I'm really in a sweet tooth craving, chances are I want to become even more acidic. And for me, with a pitta constitution, pitta vata, I have to curb that craving. And if I just drink water, the craving goes away, and I'm actually optimizing what other sources of fuel live in my body that then is suddenly metabolizing what's there, as opposed to adding more sugar on top of an already probably perhaps candida rich, but certainly acidic environment. And another great thing with that.
Speaking of which.
Yeah, right, me too. Another way to approach nutrition I found valuable, and this isn't for everybody, but apple cider vinegar is a wonderful addition to a body to help regulate the pH balance, boost the immune system, and do a number of, there are like probably 24 benefits of apple cider vinegar. It's not for everyone, it doesn't taste good, but it does, for me, my digestive tract is far stronger and cleaner when that's a regular practice.
How do you know that? How do you know it's making a difference? You say stronger and cleaner. How do you know that?
Kind of like with meditation, if I don't do it, I feel it.
I see.
And so if I'm in any way feeling irregular in my bowel movements, or if I'm just feeling sluggish, I think that's a tremendous additive to help bring balance in that area of digestion. And I think another one, astrology for me, like as far as my daily practice, back to the original question as to my daily, like how do I ground it and root it? Knowing where the moon is, for me, is a tremendous gift to, the moon's in Leo today, as it is. Then I can appreciate, there's a little bit, I want to express love more. I want to feel creative and creatively expressive in my life. That could be writing, as it is for me often, or it could be calling someone I care about to just feel the love, share the love, spread the love, and also allow my emotions perhaps a little more attention. Like, what am I feeling today? Well, and then what can I do to augment that sensation if it's one that I appreciate, or find right relation with or balance with if it's maybe a lower, denser energy. And of course, there's so many things that inform our emotional state. It's not just necessarily our life circumstance, it's also the biochemistry of our body.
Course, yeah.
And
everything's fractal.
Yeah, very much
from
so.
The body, from relationships to astrological.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. I'm sure there's more. We can totally geek out on that.
Yeah, well, and I'll say one more thing too. For anybody who lifts weights, as I'm from Nebraska, where I grew up, I actually was literally, there's a photograph of me in the hospital bed, day one. There is a football. And my arm is resting on this football. Like, this was just my destiny, right?
Right.
And my father was a college football player, and was, had he not broken his wrist a week before training camp, would have tried out for the New York Jets. But that being said, so I had that in my blood, or certainly in my day-to-day. And so weights was a part of my life as well. And many could argue about where the ego lives, the contraction of muscle. And I find that weights coupled with yoga is pivotal, because you're strengthening bone, and you're also then loosening the muscles and the sinews of the muscles that get tight from, let's say, a heavy workout, or that CrossFit example you use. The body the next day, you're going to feel that lactic acid build up and the polyuric acid in the muscles. And that forms adhesions, which forms that sensitivity to touch. So we want to break those adhesions up, just as an aside. But also, yoga is a great way to also bring space in the muscles, oxygen to the muscles in a way that expands. And so the two coupled are so complementary in my experience. And I think that'd be true of anyone who's drawn to those kinds of practices. But back to the weight thing that I like to share with people is, if you look at 5-element acupuncture, the lungs and large intestines they correspond with the metal element. And weights are iron bars, right, or whatever their metal constitution are. To touch metal and appreciate that we all have grief and we all have stuckness on some level in our body. To touch that and to actually engage with weights, not from a place of I'm lifting my bicep and I'm getting bigger or stronger, but actually I'm processing energy through my system in a way that if I bring awareness to it, I'm actually moving the chi. I'll leave the gym more often than not when I maintain that mindfulness in a way that I feel like I just came out of yoga, out of that pure shavasana where I just feel so open and so spacious.
Wait, back up one sentence. What did you do? So you touched the bar, and then what do you say to yourself?
I remember, I'll do two things. I'll bring in another corresponding system through Ayurveda. We have what are called bandhas. There's the Mula Bandha at the root. Jalandhara Bandha is about 4 inches below the navel. And then, Uddiyana Bandha. So Mula Bandha is root. Uddiyana Bandha is basically the pelvic center, or where the lower dantian from that model. And then Jalandhara Bandha is at the throat. And I'll engage my bandhas. So I'm not trying to lift my deltoids with a shoulder press. I'm actually engaging my bandhas and lifting from core. This happens to be the corresponding movement, but it's originating from the center. And I've had, knock on wood, 0 injury in the last 7 years of doing this. Like I might tweak my low back in my younger years or something like that. None of it. And that's from that, boom, bandhas engaged, touching this. There's an emotional component because it's physical, emotional, intellectual in my experience. And so I'm using that intellectual awareness of the system or structure of the body from that lens, and then touching metal and processing grief and stuckness, whether it's mine, whether I'm empathically aware of it in the field of the other people in the gym or people in my life that are in it, having their own moments, or clients for that matter. And I'll just go into the energetic field of stuckness, grief, in a way that I'm relating with it consciously, in such a way that I'll leave the gym and what was stuck, what I thought I needed a massage to get after, or what I thought I'm going to have to really figure out what this is, it's just gone. The energy just disperses.
So let me recap. So in your mind's eye, you're holding this bar, you're activating the different chakras, whatever, the different bandhas.
The bandhas, right.
The bandhas. And then also emotionally, you're thinking, all right, release this grief or anxiety or whatever. So that way you are not only activating a physical, your energetic as well as your emotional. Is that what you said? Yeah,
I wouldn't, and I don't go into a release space with it, but I do go into a presencing, presence myself with stuckness. I don't track my body and say, okay, I feel stuckness here and there. I just know that in my system there is stagnant chi, and if I relate to this, and the metal being lungs, large intestine, lungs emotionally represent grief. Stuckness, large intestine. So those two basic organ functions from Chinese medical perspective, they govern that emotion. So for example, liver anger. This is a bit of a tangent, but relevant. The experience, if I'm angry, then I have stagnant liver chi. There's no dissociating those two things. And so what can I do? Acupuncture is the best way that I know or tuning forks for that matter, to disperse stagnant chi in the liver. However, another way that I go about it is I feel that anger is actually a component of grief. Grief is not all-encompassing, but it is an encompassing kind of umbrella of a number of different emotions. It's been broken down to be 5. I've read where it's 12, and I don't know the actual answer. There's
a lot.
But so from the traditional model that I initially learned, it goes from denial to anger to sadness to grief to acceptance.
Okay.
Or sadness to depression to acceptance.
Got it.
So grief is the arching of those 5 experiences, or those 5 energetic emotional experiences, and emotion is just energy in motion. It's just, if I have an emotional thing, energy's moving. So if I'm already moving energy deliberately with the ancillary benefit of a more attuned physical vehicle, but the truth is it's moving chi in a very powerful way. It doesn't have to be weights, it can be anything, but I do find for me personally when I'm touching metal, I take that mindfulness to it, and I'll kid you not, I could have a kink in my neck that I think ooh, this is not good. I'm gonna have to figure out, I gotta call this guy or this girl or this woman to figure out how I can kind of help I can just center bandhas, engage from that place, and move very mindfully, deliberately, as best I can, be present. And in so doing, wow, that kink that I thought was going to take all kinds of things is maybe 10% of what it was, if even that. And so back to the anger example, I don't think any one emotion, I should say, I think all emotions are accessible through exercise. Whether it's the endorphins that we release to experience a sense of elevated energy and high, an endorphin high, it could be running as well. But I feel like for me personally, and I like to offer it to any of my clients that do physically work out with weights to correspond with it the other way.
Do you, in your mind's eye, seeing yourself moving the energy through your body that way? Like you're cycling through it, or you're moving
in the macro
it?
sense, yeah. Like I'm not tracking it through any given meridian channel or anything like that specific, but I am very much presencing breath, and the breath is the key to all of it. I mean, it's really the breath is initiation of all movement if we're super mindful, and that's of course how we avoid injury as well, is if I'm moving in accordance with a centered awareness. We could talk about Aikido, actually, is another art form that I find to be very effective in maintaining an awareness of being centeredly extended with our ki. Ki is a Japanese word for chi, and so much the same. I'm just using to answer your question, the experience of moving energy. It's almost it's in its entirety. It's not like, so in other words, if I'm doing bicep curls or something like that, it is so much more than building a stronger bicep or breaking down the muscle so that it can build up stronger. It's more about moving chi very deliberately at a very core level, and that's the result.
You're going from here to your biceps and then down that way. Is there
I don't
a
even track it that way. No, I appreciate you asking because it's a valid question. It's more like, for example, it doesn't even matter what body part you're focusing on in terms of the exercise. It's all about, if I'm in my core and I'm moving from core, I could be doing bicep curls, I could be doing shoulder press, I could be doing bench press, whatever, but I'm just, our strength moves. This is a lot of Qigong practice as well, which I could add to the mix of practices. Not what I've been doing lately, but has been a very solid piece of my journey. But with respect to the moving in Qigong, or Tai Chi is a nice derivative movement as well, you're kind of in the center of the movement, as opposed to now I'm moving my arm. It's more like the Qi is moving my arm, I should say, that is moving through me in a way that I have a choreographed movement based on the particular, either the stage of your Tai Chi practice or the movement you're doing in Qigong. Where if I'm doing like this in Qigong, you can't see it in the podcast, but
we're recording.
We are recording, great. So like there's a movement where you scrape the Qi across your chest. You're opening the lung channel. This also gets across the kidneys, and the lung goes down out through the thumb, and so you're literally opening. So if you're feeling unwell, breathing in like that with a very strong hand and a very strong tiger claw-like hand, and then exhaling and coming back in and coming back to center and back to rest, and inhaling and doing it that way. What one is doing is actually literally directing qi through specific parts of their body. So that's more specific to what you're talking about. Like there's qigong movements that are very deliberate about opening meridian channels through various movements. And at the gym, I just feel it's more like I'm in my bandhas. My bandhas are engaged. Therefore, I am sturdy, and I'm not like straining, or I'm not off balance.
I see.
So it feels like
you're
energy just
centering your chi
moves.
here.
Yeah,
I got you. So it's not a visualization thing.
No, it isn't for me anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to get more detail there, because for me, I wanted to be more energetically sensitive, because I feel like I'm kind of a energy savant. Like you would need a lot of, let's say, Hape as an example, to move the energy for me, right?
I got you.
Versus someone who is really sensitive, like just a little bit of anything, then they feel the difference. So for me, I wanted to be more intentional about developing that. So it sounds to me, not only the awareness, but also the like a qigong and tai chi practice will really help me in my mind's eye develop this awareness, because you touch upon it many times. You know, how you're just very energetically aware. Is that accurate?
Very accurate.
From what I gather?
Yeah, I mean, if you were asking me what could I do, I feel like I'm an energy savant in the way you just presented it. I would say any energy practice is going to be of great value, and that's Tai Chi, that's Qigong, that's yoga, among many. There are a great example. I was actually after an ayahuasca ceremony many years ago, and this hypnotherapist and I were like the last two that were still awake, and we were just sitting outside, kind of reveling in the potency of the night, and he was sharing with me a technique that he uses with clients, and he often employs in ceremonies when he's really like, being taken down an uncomfortable aspect of his journey. And he would say that he would employ the awareness of putting your attention on your periphery. So what you can see in the furthest story over or vision over to your right and to your left at about this 180 degree span, and then put your listening out there as well. And in so doing, what happens is the story that you're stuck in suddenly doesn't have the same amplification and ultimately gets dialed so far down because you're now aware of everything outside of yourself.
Oh, I see.
And so it could be a siren that goes by, or the sound of the fire crackling, or different pieces that you otherwise, because you're just churning in some internal narrative dialogue, whatever. And then when you do that, suddenly like the power, the potency that it has on your awareness, you become very externally aware in such a way that you put your attention outside of yourself. Right. So in a way, that would be another practice one could employ. If you're, let's say, your wife complains of you're not, you aren't hearing me, you aren't present, or whatever, and to go, oh, I'm probably, and mind you, when you hear that from your wife or anybody else, the reaction would be defensiveness or maybe openness, but either way, you're actually taking it on as though you're doing something wrong, which is defeating the purpose. Like, just go, oh yeah, thank you. Like, thank you. I think the best thing that I find in communication, by the way, this is another tangent, but in communication, when someone says, you're doing this or you're not doing that, and I might either A, feel like I'm wrong and therefore I apologize, or B, feel like I'm right and I defend myself, either way, it's not facilitating that peace and harmony we ultimately aspire to. So another thing I found, instead of saying I'm sorry, is thank you for bringing that to my attention. Like, there's something, maybe just 1% of what you said is valid, but I'm not going to diminish that with the 99% that I think I'm right, or that whatever. And I've found I've had a moment with my landlord, actually, that it could have escalated into something very, truculent.
Sure.
And by saying that, I watched the entire disposition shift. Like, they felt heard, and they actually felt like that what they had to say was valid, and it was. But the parts of me that could have validated being defensive or being, standing my ground in a situation that's like, well, I don't have any interest in having any entanglement, so thank you for bringing that to my attention. I'll be mindful of that moving forward. Thank you. They wanted to come after it. I could feel it. But what ended up happening is it just completely diffused the entire story. And it's since become a really easy go-to. I don't know why I had to bring that up.
No, I appreciate that. It's very telling. Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a perfect segue to my next question. Let me make sure. How are we doing on time, by the way? You're okay with?
I have a 3 o'clock client, so whatever. I don't know what time it is.
It's 2 o'clock something?
Okay, we're good.
Okay, so maybe 15 more minutes?
Sure.
Is that cool?
Sure.
Thank you. Well, the whole premise of this podcast is what it means to be a man in modern times. What's your point of view?
What it means to
be a man in modern times.
Modern times, got you.
Right. What's your point of view around the idea of masculinity? It's a philosophical question.
The first thing that comes to mind is get in touch with your feminine.
Okay.
I feel like our world is, and has been for millennia, a more left brain, pragmatic do, as opposed to more right brain, abstract feel or be. And for me, as part of my story in terms of pivotal moments, to kind of circle this all the way back, is I was cast as the first gay character on Days of Our Lives many moons ago. And that was the gig that I had for 3 years that crashed along with everything else in my Saturn return. And what that did for me was, as a kid out of Nebraska who was not encouraged to explore his feelings, but encouraged to train his body to be an exceptional athlete,
Right.
it gave me license to explore sides of myself I wouldn't have. And in so doing, feeling that sensation of homosexuality is its own conversation. That
Sure.
isn't like I think that there are homosexual people who are more masculine than feminine, and there
yeah.
are heteros that are more
course.
feminine than masculine.
Sure.
And so it's not about that. But for me, what it was an opportunity to explore a certain femininity in my being that has proven to be advantageous on every level, where there's a greater acceptance and appreciation for, say, a sensitive man, a man that's I would posit that as sensitivity goes, homosexuality lends itself to being more receptive than heterosexuality in terms of its sexual expression.
Sure.
I really don't feel like that was the statement I wanted to make, but to move forward, what I'm getting at is going into that more that softer side of myself, and I feel that yoga was as essential to that as anything. And I would say that what it means to be a man is to be deeply respectful of the feminine, and I don't mean that just in females. I mean the feminine current, like the yang, the yin to the yang, right? And so I find vulnerability to be a tremendously strong and masculine trait, and I have my own, learning curve on that, and we're all human. And at the same time, respecting the feminine in all its forms, including our own experience of that aspect of ourselves, to me feels to be so essential on the planet, and so missing in a lot of ways that our world is imbalanced. If you look at what we're doing to Earth, when we look at Gaia as a feminine organism and consciousness that births life, right? And if we look at what we're doing as a species, I feel it's relevant to appreciate that we are in avoidance of recognizing that destructive nature. We're just perpetuating it, which actually kind of leads to the graphic novel we can circle back to as far as what our aim was with that, and what we're talking about, which is unrelated to the feminine, but it is, as far as the masculine, like what is it that a modern man can do? I would say explore his feminine side. And that doesn't require being a gay character on a soap opera. What it does require is feeling what's there, and really paying attention to, and in fact welcoming the sensations that arise. And that's actually a key component of Vipassana as well, is you're just attentive to the sensations. There's no other real meditative technique beyond sitting and breathing, is just tracking sensation in the body and really coming into right relation with how much the mind perpetuates the sensation of pain that is otherwise temporary. Like the key, one of the key, it's a Pali word, it's anicca, impermanence, right? And back to that impermanent, that relationship to impermanence. And there's a lot of great work out there right now. Like David Data is doing great work, and there are offshoots of his work that I find to be exceptional. Like The Way of the Superior Man was an incredible read for me many years ago, and The Way of the Peaceful Warrior, another one that right out of college, that one just struck a chord. And so I think the other side of it is, like, to follow Socrates' advice, know thyself. And thyself it's everything, it's all of it, and know every aspect of yourself. And there are so many inroads to that, but I would say that for me, yoga was also a huge, huge component of finding stuck sensations in the body, or what my bodywork teacher Fred calls miasms, which is these carried stores of energy that could be past life, could be ancestral, could be from what happened when you were 6 years old, whatever it is. There are these elements that I find yoga, when you're putting yourself in a very deliberate posture and breathing and bringing oxygen to an otherwise very calcified energy or physical, muscular boundedness. It's amazing how much emotion lives in that, and how much putting and kind of pivoting towards, or putting one's attention towards that sensation, how much it frees up. And so I would say, do your work would be the other side of it. And I just find that my first hit was the feminine. And back to the work, one piece I wanted to really throw in terms of pivotal aspects in my life is also meeting a Fourth Way teacher. Fourth Way is a mystery school that was created by G.I. Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff is a Russian-born, I believe, Turkish origin, but just a profound teacher on the planet, transitioned in like the 50s, I believe. And his work, which is like spiritual boot camp, where there's really no soft hand. It's very like looking at it, not looking away from it, and that's really uncomfortable. So you have to keep looking, and you have a teacher who essentially facilitates that basic environment. And I've had that for over a decade now, and that teacher is also my writing partner, which does dovetail nicely now into the graphic novel.
Oh, nice. Hold on one second. But Fourth Way, say spiritual boot camp. Like, what does that do for you? What's spirituality first and foremost? Let's define that. Then we can go into what the Fourth Way is.
So, well, spiritual boot camp is a term that I read subsequent to choosing to submit myself to the teachings of the Fourth Way and understanding these esoteric teachings of Pythagoras and what Gurdjieff more or less developed as a school. And spirituality is a unique term right now. It's not mine to define, but as far as
what's your definition? Right?
My definition of spirituality,
relatively speaking.
I mean, it's an aspect of our human experience that I find to be essential. And I think it means different things to different people. What it means to me is back to that kind of transpersonal element of there's something more, there's something greater. I'm part of a larger whole that if I remember that, I'm less inclined to, litter or cut somebody off in traffic, but I have an awareness of I'm part of a bigger story, and my wants and needs are in no way prioritized over what's mine to do in the moment.
Gotcha. Thank you. I appreciate that. And what makes the Fourth Way special from your point of view?
Special. Let's see. I'm pausing because I'm trying to feel like how it was relevant for me was, it's special to me because I couldn't hide. I had plenty of tactics and techniques to avoid accountability and responsibility for things I didn't even know I was doing, or motivations I had no clue were driven by an unconscious drive. And so it's bringing, like, back to the Jung quote about, until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. I had a litany of false personalities and identification structures and ideas about who I thought I was that created all kinds of mechanisms for falling asleep. In the Fourth Way, you're either awake or you're asleep. There's no in between. And one among many tenets of the Fourth Way is that coherency in your instinctual center or moving center of the body, coherency between that center and the emotional center and the intellectual center, if all three are in any way, if one is excessive and the other is therefore deficient, you're asleep.
I see.
So if someone is highly intellectual but hasn't moved their body in 2 years, they may have knowledge and they may be able to express it beautifully and they may be able to create material content with their knowledge in a way that's very effective and beneficial. But are they awake? No, not in that school. And so for me, the end game is wakefulness, is being and remaining awake. Self-remembering is a key element of the Fourth Way. You remember yourself, and to do so is a phenomenally difficult task. We lose and find our way over again as human beings, and so, which of course is part of the dance and part of the Maya, which is the illusion in the Sanskrit term of this world of, this realm is here to play out all these aspects of what keeps us asleep. And like the Buddha under the Bodhi tree, to attain enlightenment where all the demonic forces and the Mara demons and all the things that are coming at Gautama Buddha sitting there in absolute equanimity, absolute peace, in such a way that it's just the illusory nature of the ego, or the structure of the ego, that draws us off our center, right? Equanimity, being so at one with one's center that nothing's pulling you off, and that everything is perfectly valid in a more kind of tantric way of speaking. So, in Tantra, as a practice, not as a, sexuality and Tantra are commonly merged as
Right.
as like I hear Tantra, I think sex, right? That's typically how the Western culture has it. But in a larger sense, the practice of Tantra is an all-encompassing, every moment as it's arising. How do I remain present with what's arising and not fixate on one thing or avoid another, but just be at one with what's arising? Suddenly then it doesn't matter if my girlfriend doesn't call me or she's calling me 8 times a day. I'm just at one with what's arising and not wishing it to be otherwise. That's why the fourth way is special to me, is it gave me a lot of context to a lot of different perspectives that I was holding that were not at all conscious, and were informed by an ego structure that I wouldn't have ever perceived otherwise. I don't know how I would have gotten to that awareness without that particular consistent work. And another piece to that, which I like to recommend to a lot of clients when they talk about a difficulty with sleep, or not feeling as well rested as they would prefer to feel when they wake up, is a very simple tactic of what's called dying to your day. That was a Pythagorean exercise where his devotees and students they were instructed to simply write down the objective events of your day before you go to bed. It's a simple 5-minute exercise, and it is like meditation. When I don't do it, it is so apparent to me. But if I write it down, what I'm doing is taking from the subconscious mind the content of my day, everything that happened.
So recapping your day.
Recapping it in a very objective manner, meaning I'm not talking about how I felt, but or even what they said, but that I talked to my mom. Talked to my mom, went to the, biked to the gym.
Did a podcast.
Yeah, did a podcast, massaged so-and-so, whatever the events of my day, I'll write that down tonight. And what I found, consistent with what I was taught, is that my sleep is more fulfilling and I need less of it. Not in some grand, I'm not going on 4 hours of sleep. I believe 8 hours of sleep is essential for the human body, more in terms of the body's capacity to rehabilitate whatever it's processing from the day, whether it's environmental toxins, whether it's emotional sensations that might have otherwise been high charged. So I'd say that, but dying to your day is a huge, huge thing that I can't recommend enough. And
Thank you.
Yeah,
I appreciate that. You mentioned a lot of good teachers that you stumbled across. What made your great teachers your great teachers? How does one recognize that they're in the presence of a great teacher, perfect for that person?
Similar to what we said a bit ago about when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
Sure.
If there's a resonant desire for insight into some aspect of my life, and suddenly a book is recommended, maybe unrelated to that, or just internal inquiry, and suddenly there's a book or there's a thread that feels resonant. I actually feel leaning. One of my teachers, I should say a workshop that I attended, a teacher named Scott Blossom, who teaches shadow yoga, acupuncturist in the Bay Area, offered this incredible nugget that has stuck with me, and that was that when we're quiet, consciousness naturally leans towards the Dharma, leans towards that which is in alignment, is like the next step to the ultimate fulfillment of our purpose in this incarnation. And when I heard that, and then to answer your question, if you're leaning towards something, go with it. And if you're not, if you're actually repelled by it, go with that. The teachings could sometimes be triggering, and you might want to look at what's impelling you to lean away, because it could be an avoidance of a much deeper ego death that's ready to happen and you want to happen. in terms of a belief system or a structure of identification that is ripe for ultimately being dissolved or destroyed, and then giving birth, therefore, like the phoenix rising, into a new conscious identification that's formed from the space that's created by disidentifying from some, like, I'm not worthy is the common or a common belief among many of us. So I would say, if it resonates, if it's, especially if there's 3 times that it comes to you. This is a great teaching I also received where, let's say the movie A Star is Born is, I saw the trailer, it looks kind of intriguing, and I'm thinking about it, you know, maybe I'll see it, and then suddenly my wife comes home and she's like, oh my God, I listened to this podcast with Lady Gaga and we got to see this movie. And you're like, wow. First time it's information. The second time it's interesting. And let's say you go to your email and, you know, a buddy's like, dude, I just saw A Star is Born, and it's all that. And then that's confirmation. So the way that we can play with synchronicity, using a term that was coined by Carl Jung, is if it shows itself 3 times, pay attention and follow that thread. Whether it's, wow, he talked about spirulina and I was just reading about spirulina, and plus my best friend's like, he couldn't stop talking about it 2 weeks ago. Chances are you've pulled into your field a thread of information relevant to your highest possible good. In this case, spirulina as a supplement to your diet. You know, and I'm an advocate of it for myself. Everybody's body is so unique, so I don't try to tell everybody they should be having something or anything, but that's what I mean is when it's
pay attention to serendipity.
Yeah, serendipity, yeah. When it happens 3 times, like Burning Man's a great example. There's just so much serendipity that can happen in a unique container like that. In India, I find to be very similar as well. It's like if you let your attention or intuition be guided, it's remarkable how you already know the answer to things you might doubt or second guess if you just, oh wow, that's the 3rd time I'm reading that book, or I'm practicing yoga, or whatever that 3rd thing, or that should say that whatever comes up 3 times is.
Thank you. And what makes your best friends your best friends? On the similar, like what's your tribe, right? You know, what makes your people your people?
Trust. That I feel a natural space of being myself and being seen and received as such, and a willingness to ask the hard questions, a willingness to look within, a willingness to know themselves and to be honest with themselves and with me about who they are or where they are, or a freedom that I feel, a trust that I feel to be able to do the same. Laughter, play, an ability to own their shit, and as well to hold me to account for mine. I find that to be extraordinarily valuable. Yeah, I mean, the people that I feel I can lean on when I need to lean on somebody, and the people that I feel empowered or kind of embodied when they lean on me. Yeah.
Beautiful. Let's talk about your project, most recently. How can you, because you have this guidance, astrological guidance, right? On your path. You're doing a lot of things, body work, personal yoga practice, your screenplay, and now this graphic novel. How do you, the yin energy is all about flow. It's all about starting new things because it's fun, sexy, right?
Right.
But how do you balance that with the yang energy where you focus on, craft, let's say? So I guess that's a multi-part question. Right? So philosophically speaking, how do you, because, with the guidance that you have, the tools that you have, how do you know, all right, this is just a fleeting idea, I shouldn't pursue it, or like, no, pursue it, 1. And 2, what got you to develop this graphic novel? Because it's a really cool idea. Let's talk about it a little bit more.
Cool. Bringing the philosophical kind of angle on it, in the fourth way, there's a very easy kind of litmus test for whether or not what's arising is the next step or simply a distraction. And
Great.
that is, remember your aim.
Remember your aim.
Remember your aim.
Okay.
For me, for example, I entered into this work with my teacher, Mac McCrary, who's also my writing partner, and we did so with an awareness that the idea that I had written into a short story and a long-standing knowledge that he had of the fourth way, having gone through a school which is called the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. That is what fourth way schools in the West were called, offshoots of Gurdjieff's work. And in that process of doing that school for many years, he became an adept with that knowledge and information. And in its distillation to me, we used the story that we came together and realized, oh, we're to write this together. This is what's happening. It was just obvious. And I was in Chinese medicine school at the time, and I ended up going to India with him, and it changed everything. I mean, having
going to
India changed. I didn't go back to school after that, so I went to school for just a year of Chinese medicine before taking a quarter off to go to India, and then I never went back because that story and he and I's connection while in India as well, subsequent, was like, oh, this is what we're doing. This is the next step. And so the aim for me was, and I'll get back to like why remember your aim is, I'll give you the fundamental teaching, but before I do that, I'll just say this. The aim for me was, how can I give back? What's my greatest contribution? What can I do? What is inspiring me to move forward? And I was in Chinese medicine school as a kind of extension of my bodywork practice, where I realized this is a very relevant means of helping bring a human organism to balance. And when he and I dropped in India to the profound level that we did at the ashram of a man named Swami Nagananda, a beautiful guru, there was this experience of this project, and what we aimed for it to be from an individual standpoint was, it's a vehicle for self-remembering. That's all this is. We're not identified with its outcome, because then we're not present to what it's here and designed to bring us to, as far as self-remembering and all the work and all the negative voices, I'm a horrible writer, or this is never going to work, and all that, and just like get present with the voice. And then want what it does not want. It does not want me to write, so I'm going to sit down and write, even though I'm like, just trudging through the mire of not getting anything to really come through. And so the aim that I had was basically being in service, would be an easy way to say it. And this felt like a very relevant opportunity to do that. And so for us, for me at least, pivoting out of Chinese medicine school while still using that same philosophy and approach, using tuning forks instead of needles, but finding my way to like let that relevant thread continue in my practice, but also getting out of the idea that I'm going to school for 2 more years and instead going to write this screenplay. And we wrote multiple trilogies, and we wrote we wrote so many versions of the story. It's been a wild ride, but the basic takeaway was, we would finish an entire script and we would map out the trilogy. We're ready to go, ready to take it to market. And then we go and we went and saw Inception, and they did it. They did dream sharing, and they did dreams within dreams. And we were just like, what? We have to start over from scratch. And in so doing, all I had to do was remember my aim. What's your aim? It's a story that articulates a hero's journey, very much drawn from the works of Joseph Campbell and as well Jungian psychology, and in so doing realizing, well, guess what? You have to start over, but it's consistent with the aim, so it's a yes. And versus, relationships or things that might have pulled my attention and given me pause to go, maybe I do want to just move to India and go live in an ashram and not do this. No, that's not your aim. You might be able to justify that it's in service for you to be in meditation and help the collective consciousness by being in that field of awareness. But that's not your aim. Your aim is being in service and applying, giving something. And that was what we both consistently would come back to as a reason we stayed on task in spite of enormous resistance. And that kind of comes back to the fourth way and remembering your aim. So if you look at the basic structure of form, and this is a Pythagorean teaching, that form is, I should say, formlessness comes into form through sound. And so through, like, first there was the word or sound, and so we have Om as the origin of all creation, right? And then we have physical form that is emergent from sound, if one wants to take that perspective on it. And the way that Pythagoras taught his students, and then it was an extension therefore through the Gurdjieffian school, I have the perspective that I believe it's an Egyptian mystery school teaching, though I'm not 100% on that, but it's the basic structure of an octave. That we were using music reference a little while ago, and I was using the psychological overlay of that, but we have three energies in the universe that inform everything. Everything is just an extension of, or a derivative of, these three basic energies. There's affirming energy. I get out of bed, it's a new day. That's the do note of the day. It's the new getting away from sleep and getting towards wakeful involvement in reality. And goes do, re, mi, fa, so, la, si. And so in those 7 notes in the octave, the first 3 are the affirming energy. Affirming. I'm affirming this. I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do. Then there's going to be denying energy of equal measure. That is a fundamental law of physics. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if we know that, the bigger the affirmation, the stronger the resistance we're going to face. And so knowing, and that's why you have to remember your aim, because you could meet somebody falling, just like, well, my God, we love the same things, we're into ceremony, we're into yoga, and it's all great, and you're beautiful, and you think I'm whatever, and so here we are, like, coming together, we're going to link up. That's the re note, linking up. And then we've got the mi note, attack and understand, and we're just into it, and now we're going to go to India together, and we're going to do this together, and then all of a sudden, there's going to be a shock point between the mi note and the fa note. So the fa and the so are the denying energy, affirming, denying, or initiation and resistance. These are the basic constants that we're working with. We can start with, like you mentioned, like the newness. It's hot, it's sexy, it's something fresh, because we're getting away from, and there's the newness, there's the allure of the newness.
Right.
And so with the resistance, we're going to hit this no matter what. It can come in so many different forms. It could be like, you just got a job in New York. I have no desire to live in New York, and I don't want to do a long-distance relationship, but we're in love, and we're going to do this. Well, guess what? Resistance has now shown up. How do you get to the la note and the si note, which is the third energy, the most important key, I think, to alchemy, quite frankly, and that is reconciling energy. What's the reconciling energy? My clients here.
All right.
So in that space, the opportunity, therefore, and this is like a shock point, like, okay, now we have to get to the C note, which is completion verification and support and verification. And so with that, we go, oh, what is the reconciling energy to fulfill on the task or to remember my aim? If the aim for us, for example, was a film trilogy, you asked about the graphic novel. The graphic novel came online when we realized our best play to bring our vision to the world wasn't going to be to sell the screenplay to someone else to make, but for us to co-produce with others of like mind and of skill to bring a film to the world. Well, for us to own this so fully, we realized adapting it into a graphic novel, which is kind of the opposite form of, usually it's a graphic novel that becomes a movie. Well, we wrote the movie, then we adapted the graphic novel, because we realized we need to bring this vision and give it its best possible legs. And we found a brilliant artist, Nova Magapo, and through that process, actually, we actualized the story tenfold greater than what it was before we started the adaptation process. And it's really the hero's journey that is basically hitting a truckload of resistance. Like any good story, you're going to basically climb your hero into a tree, and he's got to figure out how to get out. And so the consistent awareness of the affirming energy is Earth's transformation and evolution into the multiverse. That is what the medicine gate is about. And we have a hero who's got to essentially go through his darkest traumas and traumatic memories that are stored in the crystal matrix of Earth, and in so doing activate his multidimensional abilities to be able to empathically sense where his niece is, teleport to her rescue, and bring her to the one place on the planet that she can release Earth into the multiverse based on a story element that she was born in the locus during the locus, I should say a locus in space-time, that a point of order emerged. And that has to do with genuine geological science, that we are in a time of increasing chaos. Bifurcations are happening. Bifurcation is an uptick in chaotic energy, a separation. And so we're in this place of more and more chaos seems to be happening on the planet. So how do we as human beings become points of order within the chaos? How do we basically identify ourselves with this 7-year-old child, as well as this hero who's got to go through all this stuff to get her to the place where then she can go through the transformational process of releasing Earth into the multiverse before the Wetiko aliens, who 14 billion years ago were exiled from the multiverse, hence the Big Bang. So our universe is actually just like a penal colony or a prison outpost for a rogue alien race that wants nothing but to return to the multiverse to exact their revenge on the Star Council that exiled them 14 billion years ago. And how they figured out how to do it is human consciousness was designed to evolve Earth into the multiverse, and if they can co-opt us, which the Wetiko have, and there's plenty of teachings on this planet, the Wetiko is a term currently in the zeitgeist around this cannibalistic, murderous, consumptive energy that drives the human unconscious. And so we basically told a story where we infuse plot points and elements that represent metaphorically that deeper undercurrent of what's driving this planet and, you know, into the rocks, so to speak, and how do we wake up before it's too late.
Can't wait to read it.
Great, I'll give you a copy.
From the little bit of what I hear, it sounds like a very, you know, you got elements of a very rich universe.
That was our aim.
And a lot of storylines can be developed. I see the framework. I see the possibility.
Right on.
Yeah.
Thanks,
hey Ryan, really appreciate everything that you brought. I really appreciate you sharing. You know, we ventured into difficult questions, some inquiries, philosophical discussions, and some tactical things. I really acknowledge your generosity in just being who you are, and you brought everything. You know, I hope people, the audience members who are discerning, they can really hear the depth of your journey, but also your wisdom as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, CK. I appreciate you asking the questions and doing the work that you're doing, and I think that it's a noble warrior embodiment to bring this whole inquiry forward. So thank you for all the work you've done as well. I know it's substantial.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's been great. I really appreciate you.